Okay, I want to talk about Fort White, and that's one place I forgot in our travels on the Seminole War Heritage Trail. So this will be a side video, an extra, and mainly because there's a few things that are uncertain about that, I guess. So that's probably why it didn't make the booklet. But let's show you where it's at. Let me share the screen on the 1839 McKay Blake map. Let's zoom in. I have a real high resolution. Um, this is the Swanee River here, and then the Santa Fe runs into it. Tuckney Springs up here. You see Fort White on the Santa Fe, what is now Gilchrist County, and I guess at the time it was considered Columbia County. And north of that, going north of Fort White across the Santa Fe River, it eventually goes up to Alligator, which is now Lake City. And we'll talk about that in a minute too. But on the modern map, the modern Fort White is on the north side of the river, not far from Alino, uh, Alino River State, oh, what is it? Alino State Park. Yeah, okay, it's where the natural land bridge is, of course. So the modern Fort White is probably around where this crossroad is, I guess, on the modern map. So anyway, let's talk about the town itself. Um, Here's a historical marker, the town of Fort White, found named for a former Second Seminole War fort built nearby in 1837. The town was founded in 1874, briefly after the arrival of the railroad. So not much Seminole War information. The earliest mention I see of Fort White is when General Jessup did a inspection tour of the fort in 1837. The first post return is March 1838, the next year. So it was apparently manned by the Florida and Alabama militia before then. The post returns go to about June 1840. It was originally garrisoned by I think, the Second Infantry, mm, then the Second Dragoons. In 1840, it was abandoned for about a year. Then the next return shows up September 1841, and the Second Dragoons were the garrison of the fort. And then the 7th Infantry under Major Gabriel Rains came in 1842, and it looks like it was abandoned around May or June of 1842. Now, outside of Fort White, kind of to the east of town, if you're going from Alino to Fort White, there's a Tustenuggee United Methodist Church. And this is an interesting story. It's, I guess, a lot of folklore involved, which is kind of one reason we don't have it in the Seminole War Heritage Guide, um, because it's a little indeterminate on what actually happened. Tustenuggee Church is named after an Indian chief named Tustenuggee. Uh, Tustenuggee is a common title or name, means like head warrior. Tiger Tail was also called Tustenuggee, but it's said to be named after Halapatter Tustenuggee, Alligator chief. Of course, Alligator was a major chief during the Seminole War. I think he was originally Eufaula Indian, was in the Creek War, and then came to Florida. He was involved in Dade's Battle and also the Battle of Okeechobee. So he saw a lot of action. He was removed and sent out to Oklahoma. So whatever Tustenuggee chief here is probably not the our Chief Alligator, even though it's not far from Alligator Settlement, which is now Lake City. And there's a grave here in the cemetery. It's said that he protected the church and the congregation. The church was established in the territorial days, and he protected it. And it's supposedly in the cemetery in back, he was buried under a large oak tree. And you can see here the stump remains with his tombstone. And there's these temporary funeral markers. It says he's buried with nine of his warriors. So some action. Either he died of natural causes or he died in battle somehow, and the settlers had so much respect that they buried him in the normal cemetery. So a bit unusual, and probably not why it's not our heritage guide because the story's not verified. It's an interesting story, and it's pretty neat seeing a church named Tustenuggee Church. Now, also in the Fort White area, they have a marker here for the Bellamy Road, which is, of course, interesting. That's the road built by John Bellamy that went from Jacksonville to Pensacola, and Bellamy built the road from, I guess, Piccolata or where the road crosses the St. Johns River up to, I think, the Apalachicola River, went to Tallahassee, and then it took it over what's now Chattahoochee. But one more thing about Fort White, looking into the records to see what was going on, I found an interesting reference in the Army Navy Chronicle about a massacre that happened near there. And I know some people argue over a massacre or battle. This was definitely a massacre because it involved families who really weren't involved in the war so much. It says Fort White, March 8th, 1842, a family of Mr. Tillis of McClellan settlement about 30 miles north of Fort White was attacked by seven Indians on the 24th at 11 o'clock. Doing some more research, I found this is Richard Tillis, uh, his family. It doesn't say in this article which Tillis it was. In the past, I've talked about Willoughby Tillis, who moved to Fort Meade, which is now Polk County, and was involved in the last skirmish of the Third Seminole War in June of 1856, where Indians attacked Willoughby Tillis's homestead and turned into a major battle on the Peace River. Willoughby Tillis is buried in New Hope Cemetery. Um, I think it's outside of the town of Fort Meade, not far from Sand Mountain. Anybody who's familiar with that area, so I've actually been to his grave. Um, so this is his cousin, Richard Tillis, from looking at the genealogy, looking up on Ancestry. Mr. Tillis had been called away on the affairs, and so the Indians attacked. It's finding the family defenseless, fired upon his wife when she is passing between two small houses, partly built, and she was shot down, immediately called to a young lady living with her to run from the Indians with her baby, 3 weeks old. And then Mrs. Tillis fell dead in the yard. The girl snatched up the child, lying in the house upon the bed, and fled, followed by one of the Indians who overtook her within 50 yards of the house and plunged a knife in her. Uh, and but distracted from the plunder, uh, the infant was overlooked. Four other children, oldest about 6 or 7, the youngest between 2 and 3 old, were shot each with an arrow. The Indians left the premises and emptying the feather bed into the yard, loading themselves with plunder. In the course of the day, the matter was discovered. Miss Tillis and a child about 4 years old, both dead, a little boy 2 or 3 years, sitting by his mother with an arrow protruding from his left breast, subsequently died. A little girl with an arrow sticking from her back hid behind a log, and our little boy on his knees also hid with an arrow shot through him, but was not extricated, which probably prevented his lying down, his head being much cut with a hoe. The little baby uninjured, and the young lady uh, uh, bleeding profusely, or we'll say. Strange to say that the two last injured are in a fair way of recovery. The rest are dead. Dog was also found dead. As soon as the facts were known, pursuit was immediately commenced of Captain McClellan, mounted volunteers nearby, a body of regulars, Company A, 7th Infantry, commanded by Brevet Major Gabriel Rains from Fort White, and Captain Thornton's troop of dragoons from Fort Fanning. Second dragoons, of course, the Indians were trailed to their crossing on the Swanee River. Dragoons crossing at Fort Fanning. The Indians were trailed to their camp within 2 miles of Fort Barker, and seven of their wives and children taken. The Indian warriors, authors of the tragedy, were fired upon and one of them shot down, but owing to the darkness of the night, they finally escaped in a state without their clothing. On Sunday, 27th of February, Miss Oglesby is said to have been burnt in her house about 18 miles from Mr. Tillis's. Let's see. Anyway, uh, interesting account. So that's Fort White. Looking on the post returns, it had the regular history of most of the posts in Florida of different companies coming and going, listing the sick and deserted. But that action nearby that I just read about seems to be about the most action they had late in the war under Captain Rains of the 7th Infantry. And the Tustenuggee Church, which I hope you found interesting. So anyway, this just impromptu, spontaneous video I wanted to do, covering one of the sites that I had missed in the Seminole War Heritage Trail. So if you think you might know another site that needs to be added to the Heritage Trail that I might miss, also let me know. And thank you very much.